Elements of poetry. The elements of poetry constitute the tools by which poets convey the thoughts and experiences they wish to communicate. These elements include imagery, rhythm, sound, and diction. They are the very essence of poetic study or criticism, and a full comprehension of their meaning and functions in the realization of the total experience of any poem is of paramount importance. I am Sikari Kiko, and our focus for today is elements of poetry. Kindly subscribe to this channel while we take you on a free drive around the world of learning, ranging from poetry, art, folktales, health, and many more. Once again, welcome on board. Imagery. In simple terms, imagery as an element of poetry is a collective term used to denote the images in the poem or all the objects and qualities of sense perception in a poem. In other words, it is a language that represents sense experience as graphically as possible. Thus, it is the sensory content of a poem or a literary work in general that is meant to evoke a picture or an idea in the mind of the reader or the audience. You must have had this experience on occasions when you read a poem and images or pictures of the ideas and objects described or mentioned in the lines appeared in your mind's eye or flash on the mirror of your mind. You seem to have seen these pictures right before you on the page or in the spaces in front of you. Due to the power of imagery, poets utilize it to achieve the following important effects in their works. 1. Arouse specific emotions in the reader or audience. 2. Create beauty, which is an important quality of poetry. 3. Communicate thoughts. 4. Achieve concretion of life experiences and ideas that are otherwise abstract. Accordingly, it is through imagery that the sense impressions and experiences evoked in a poem acquire the necessary vividness and clarity. Types of imagery. The following are the main types of imagery that you will always find used either individually or in combination by poets in their respective works. Auditory imagery. This is the type of imagery, words or a cluster of words that evoke the sense of hearing or specific sound. Quite often, the auditory image manifests through the figure of sound known as onomatopoeia, that is, a combination of words whose sound seems to resemble or echo the sound it denotes. Example: hum, murmur, bang, crack, hiss, screech, and hoot. Olfactory imagery. Images of this type evoke our sense of smell, whether sweet, fragrant, or bad. Tactile imagery. This refers to the images that appeal to one's sense of touch. Gustatory imagery. The images that evoke our sense of taste go by this name. Visual imagery. Quite often, our sense of sight or vision is evoked by merely reading lines of poetry where a poet has effectively utilized words or language that effectively create appropriate pictures in the reader's mind. Such resultant images are referred to as visual images or imagery. Kinesthetic imagery. Kinesthetic imagery refers to those images that call forth in the mind of the reader the perception of movement. In other words, these are images that appeal to the reader's sense of movement or motion. The second element of poetry, rhythm. Rhythm is derived from the Greek word which translates in English into flow. As one of the elements of poetry, it is considered the most important of a poet's technical resources. In practical terms, it is the alternation of periods of effort with the periods of relaxation. According to R.N. Ogudu, rhythm can be compared with the beat or pulse. And as a beat or pulse, it implies the presence of movement in which there is the recurrence of identical points. Rhythm can also be said to mean movement. Any action in which motion is involved, therefore, has some rhythm. A moving vehicle shows rhythm, and a flowing stream exhibits rhythm. Also, the rise and fall of the water in the ocean is rhythmic. Similarly, reefs sees rhythm as a form of repetition of a particular pattern of light and heavy syllables, while Abrahams defines it as a recognizable thought variable pattern. It is equally important to note that the repetition that characterizes rhythm in poetry, as in music, is variable and alternates between stressed and unstressed syllable. Third element of poetry, sound. Sound is one of the most pleasing features of a poem. Along with rhythm, it constitutes the foundation of the musical quality that is associated with poetry as a form of literature. Accordingly, it functions in a poem as similar to those of rhythm, which we have discussed in the preceding section on rhythm. The nature or significance of sound in a poem can be better appreciated when the poem is read aloud. However, this does not mean that the oral qualities are not realized when a poem is read silently. For the experienced reader, these qualities remain and are realized as inherent parts of the total poem. Instead of the focalized realization that marks reading aloud, these qualities are achieved through a process of subfocal enunciation. When effectively deployed in a poem, sound effects enable the reader to achieve a state of mind in which he or she can more really appreciate the emotions and meanings conveyed in the poem by the writer. Generally, sound effects in poetry not only give oral or auditory pleasure to the reader, they equally give added significance to the words used by the poet. In other words, sound in poetry is used to convey meaning, emotions, and pleasure. For example, the poet employs such literary devices as alliteration, assonance, consonance, rhyme, onomatopoeia, repetition, refrain, to place the desired emphasis on particular words as well as achieve specific emotion or sensation in his work. It is important that the sound be appropriate to the experience or an action in a line or stanza. The effect produced by sound in a poem could be good or bad, depending on how skillful the poet is. Diction. In very simple terms, diction means the use of words in oral or written discourse. The peculiar choice of words used by poets or use of vocabulary considered by their meaning and association rather than for their oral qualities. More expansively, Abraham has defined the term as the selection of words in a work of literature. A writer's diction can be analyzed under such categories as the degree to which his vocabulary is abstract or concrete, Latinate or Anglo-Saxon in origin, colloquial or formal, technical or common, literal or figurative. Accordingly, nothing is clearer indication of the interest, habits of mind, and period of a poet than his or her diction, the words he or she uses in his or her poem. Different periods in English literature have chosen and polarized various forms of poetic diction. In addition to the subcategories mentioned in Abraham's definition above, a poet's diction can also be described as plain or ornate. homely or exotic, contemporary or archaic, familiar or cryptic, and each kind has its attraction as well as its limitation. You should be able to analyze any given poem to determine the dominant pattern of the diction or selection of words employed by a poet in his or her work. Nonetheless, irrespective of the positions of these schools of thought, there is consensus on the major elements that, by and large, distinguish poetry from other forms of writing. And those elements are imagery, rhythm, sound, and diction.